Have you ever felt at some point in your life that living was kind of like running on a treadmill? I don't know, maybe you all are like, many of you maybe are blissfully retired and just like worry-free at this point. I don't know. But what I'm talking about is that tendency of all of us to live and work for the next thing, whatever that is. And that next thing could be anything. It's whatever you're supposed to do or expected to do or want to do in your life. You know, the goals that you set for yourself or maybe goals that are foisted onto you. Remember how when you were successful in high school maybe and you got some good grades and all of a sudden it was like, oh, better do the same but even better in college now, right? Or you have to go and get a trade immediately. And then you got to go get the right kind of job, and then that turns into climbing that proverbial career ladder, and it's not enough just to have a job, right? You've got to have a career. They always ask, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What's the next thing going to be? Or maybe the next thing was something you needed or something you wanted. You know, maybe it was a car or a house or a designer handbag, or some clothing, or a new computer, or maybe a vacation even. Whatever it is, an aspiration, usually material or career related, that we've been working for. And that's what I mean when I say life kind of feels like a treadmill sometime, because it feels like nothing is ever settled. Nothing's ever enough just the way it is. There's always something else that needs our time, our energy, our attention, and above all, our money, right? It's an exhausting state of affairs. But we just seem to accept that this is like the way that life is. Without a second thought, we don't even really question it often. That that's the way it just has to be. And I think because of that, I'm always interested in people who make that countercultural choice to not do that, to kind of step off that treadmill. Recently, I came across this amazing story of Jason Brown. Many folks probably don't know him, but he was a professional football player who spent his youth playing for the Baltimore Ravens and the St. Louis Rams. But at a certain point, Brown just realized he didn't need any more money. This is like the most un-American thing we can even imagine. He just said at a certain point, I just don't need this anymore. I don't need to keep up with the lavish lifestyle that many pro athletes have. And so in his late 20s, Brown walked away, this is true, walked away from a 5-year, $37 million contract. Don't need it, don't want it. He retired from pro football, and when he did that, by the way, he was one of, if not the single highest paid player in the league, and he left that all behind to become a farmer. I'm not joking. By the way, this is funny. He literally, while he was a pro football player, he was watching YouTube tutorials on how to farm. You kind of imagine him in the locker room, like, you know, this is how you grow cucumbers. Like, I don't know, for some reason that's funny to me. But this is really true. Brown now owns a 1,000-acre farm in rural North Carolina, which he calls First Fruits Farm, where he grows sweet potatoes and, yes, cucumbers and beets and other things. And the proceeds are not sold. All of the crops are given to local food banks. And yes, you can probably tell from the name of the farm that Brown is a practicing Christian, and he views this stage of his life as a matter of his own personal faith journey. The mission of his farm is, and I quote, to share the love of Christ and aid in hunger relief. That's it. That's the purpose of his life now. Jason Brown deliberately gave up one of the highest echelons of professional sports in order to be a farmer and grow food and give the proceeds to the poor. That's a pretty cool story, if you ask me. When I was in college, I would sometimes join the chaplain to go and pray Compline. When I was really stressed out about something, I'd go to the chapel and we'd pray Compline together. And I remember clearly the words that we used to say. These are taken from the New Zealand prayer book, which is what we were using then. And it says, "It is but lost labor that we haste to rise up early and so late take rest and eat the bread of anxiety." It's quoting from Psalm 127. "For those beloved of God are given gifts even while they sleep." Beautiful. And those words were a real comfort to me, but they also began to make me feel uncomfortable too sometimes, because can I really trust God that much? I mean, seriously. Like in a real concrete leap of faith kind of way, can I find that trust? I mean, I have serenity in prayer, of course. I might talk about the lost labor of rising so early, but you still got to study for the exam. You know what I mean? Or what about the real challenges that happen in real life, like serious illness, or being handed a pink slip at the office, being demoted, downsized? What about home foreclosure, bankruptcy, poverty? Trust in God sounds well and good, but can we really trust like that? To a great degree? Don't we want to put more trust in real estate, 401ks, cold, hard cash? Goes a long way. We have a saying, right? In America, we love to say this: God helps those who help themselves. That was Ben Franklin's way of putting it. And so the temptation to trust ourselves and to trust our wealth is always there. That's the American way, in a sense, Get up early, work 12-hour days, hustle, 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 until you make it. But the problem is that this treadmill of hustling for monetary rewards is also constantly frustrating. Because while I might earn enough to buy that new car, and that makes me happy for a few weeks, it never lasts. Once again, it will bring me back to that treadmill because there's going to be another thing down the road. And what does it gain us? What have we achieved? This is why people have what we call a midlife crisis, right? What have you achieved sometimes after decades of work, really? After searching for more and better and faster, what do we get? Fleeting happiness, transitory joy, just momentary satisfaction. So Jesus tells this wonderfully short and punchy story that's come down to us in our tradition as the parable of the rich fool. Isn't that great? And in this story, there's a billionaire type with far more money than sense. I'm sure there are no modern parallels to that. And he decides that he simply does not have enough room for all of his stuff. Just doesn't have enough room for it. His 10 Ferraris do not fit into the modest 20,000 square foot home. So he's got to build a new house with a new garage to put that 11th Ferrari in. And his third private jet is just not going to land on a runway this short. So the runway's got to be expanded too, right? And he tells himself, when you've got that 11th Ferrari and that third jet and the new home, finally he's going to be satisfied. Finally, this is the one that's going to be the one. And so he says to himself, relax, eat, drink, be merry, it's enough. It's enough. But the same night that he finalizes those construction plans and puts in the order for the jet, the billionaire has a massive heart attack, and his life was demanded of him, to use Jesus' wonderful turn of phrase. And so what really was the point of that 11th Ferrari, Jesus asks? It's a good question. Of course, it's easy to pick on billionaires, and many of them deserve it, but the same principles also apply at a smaller scale in our lives. A few years ago, I came across some fascinating research by an economist at the University of Southern California named Richard Easterlin, who had studied how vastly improving quality of life and personal wealth affects people's happiness. So Easterlin decided he was going to study countries that had experienced massive economic growth and to see if that experience had made people happier. It's an interesting thing to test, right? He chose countries where the per capita income had doubled in less than 20 years. He found a few examples of that. Places where the overall economy had just expanded and the average wage had doubled in a short period of time, in the span of one lifetime, one working career. And see how the individual wealth of its citizens had exploded to historically unprecedented levels. How had that impacted people? What had happened to them? So the question was, if people are twice as rich on average, will they also be twice as happy? Well, as it turns out, the answer is no, they're not. Quite interestingly, the bullish economy of countries appeared to have little to no effect on the reported rates of life satisfaction and of overall happiness. In fact, in 2 of the 3 countries that Easterlin studied, people actually reported being less happy after all of this economic growth than they were in the years prior. The results of the surveys were strikingly consistent, the researcher said, across country and culture and across time. The sense of well-being in a country's citizens did not go up with income. Even when their personal wealth doubled, happiness and well-being remained pretty flat. Now, I have to just say as a sidebar, because this comes up every time we talk about wealth or money, obviously having some wealth is necessary for happiness up to a point. It's not true that homeless folks are blissfully happy, obviously. That's ridiculous. If you are poverty-stricken, then a good-paying job will make a world of difference. But it's also true, and this is the bigger point here, that wealth gives very quickly diminishing returns on both life satisfaction and happiness, almost always revert back to the norm, to a baseline that they were before. And so it turns out the problem isn't really limited to billionaires at all. Why is this? Well, Jesus' answer to the question is pretty blunt. This is the fate of those who store up treasures for themselves but are not rich toward God, he says. Now, not to steal any of that prophetic thunder, but I could frame it another way. I think the issue is that we are spiritual beings. We are spiritual creatures. And if there's a part of us that are spiritual beings, we cannot find rest and fulfillment in material possessions alone or career accomplishments alone. Doing that is like trying to cure thirst with a salt lick. It just doesn't work that well. In fact, it makes things worse. We're not only material, we're also spiritual. But the Spirit longs for another kind of goal. Deep down in the darkest recesses of our hearts, we know this truth, we sense it, that you can't take it with you, and no amount of work or wealth will bring spiritual fulfillment. Trust me, the Egyptian pharaohs tried. They tried taking their possessions into the afterlife with them, and the grave robbers took every stitch of it. The wisest of all things is to say, this is enough. And instead of walking on that continual treadmill, place our trust in God and focus on things in life that really matter. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks, God says to the prophet Hosea this morning. Even though God's children are constantly wandering away, I bent down to them and I fed them. Trusting in God and not in wealth and possessions and job titles is a scary thing to do. Some would say it's even a foolish thing to do. But what's the alternative? If it's that treadmill, once again. It's the madness of chasing after wealth that doesn't satisfy and possessions that we never truly possess. It's the insanity of working through vacations and checking our email from the beach. It's a life we don't live, but we simply inhabit. In the end, what happens to all of those full barns? What do we do with them when our precious life passes through our fingers, when our satisfaction of money and power and status and possession or career accomplishment drifts away from us? What remains at the end? Hopefully, if we have used our time and talent and shared what is in those barns, what remains is God and the riches of a different kind entirely, of loving service to our neighbors of good relationships, and of strong communities. What remains is a peace which passes all understanding, as St. Paul put it. What remains is the knowledge that even when our lives are beaten with the wind and rain of a hurricane, at the center of everything, in the eye of that storm, is the peace of the knowledge of Jesus Christ. Holy Lord, today we ask you for the strength and the courage and the audacity to put our trust in you and not in wealth and material things, that you may be made fully manifest in our hearts. In your holy name, amen.